Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming back to the Citrine Path. Today, again, we have myself, Amber, and my amazing co-host.
And I'm Patsy from Violet Elements. Before we get started here, we just want to share real quick that this is our journeys and our guest journey on their spiritual life and their herbal life. So, everything we talk about here, we do recommend you do your own research and definitely talk to your provider before you start any herbal remedies or home remedies. Welcome back, everybody. I am so excited to share the rabbit hole I went down after our last episode. So, this will kind of piggyback off of what we started talking about last time. So, we'll link episode 3 down in the description in case you missed it, because you might want to catch that one before we move on. Okay, Amber, I went down the rabbit hole too, kind of about the same stuff. Do you want to go first and share with me what you learned about where your mind went after the whole plant bullying episode we talked about last time?
Yeah, so it was pretty cool to research all of this stuff. So I looked up if trees can communicate to each other, and if they do, what do they communicate about? So I looked up that trees communicate through the roots of mushrooms. So, have you ever heard of mycorrhiza before, Mom?
Yeah, but I don't know enough about it to like tell you what it is.
So, a couple of years ago, I worked in a grow shop, and mycorrhiza was a big thing that everybody was putting in their plants. Come to find out, it was actually found in the redwoods in California. But mycorrhiza is actually the root system of fungi. So, um, so it actually is derived from the Greek word mycos, which means fungus, and rhiza, which is root, which is pretty interesting.
Mm.
But yeah, so these trees' roots will branch out and will stem throughout the ground of the forest. And then the mycorrhiza, which looks like almost like mold growing in the soil, it's very thin, very wispy root systems. And sometimes they'll grow inside of the roots of the trees, or sometimes they'll just surround the tree roots. But basically, what happens is then the root of the the trees can't uptake all of the nutrients in the soil. So the mycorrhiza will grow and will absorb some of those nutrients and give it into the roots of the trees. In return, the trees will photosynthesize the carbon dioxide in the sunlight into sugars. And those sugars is what the mushrooms need to survive. So it's like a partnership between the mushrooms and the trees to be able to both survive and strive in this environment. So,
Wow, that's crazy. Okay.
yeah. So then through this partnership that they have, um, one tree, so they did this big research project in the forests of Canada. So in the forests of Canada, they had a square area, and they figured out that through DNA testing, one tree was able to connect to 47 other trees through this mycorrhiza. And
That's crazy.
yeah, so having the DNA from all of these different trees into one root system, they realized that they were passing then not only nutrients from the tree to the mushroom, but they were also passing to the other trees. So when they started realizing this, they would take what they call a hub tree, which is the largest tree in a section, And that's where all these connections came off of. So from there, they tested and seen where the nutrients were going. And they realized the trees can actually realize the kinship between each other. So these trees
Mm.
that would realize the kinship would push more nutrients, more sugars, and more water into their kinship trees, which I thought was extremely interesting.
That is super cool. So I wonder if that's um me and my names, I'm blanking on it. But there is a grove of trees that is the same tree, but there's like 300 and something trees, but they were proved that they're all DNA matched to the exact same tree, and it's almost like the roots sprout up another tree.
Yeah, and they completely do.
You
Like,
know what I'm
so if you look
talking
at
about?
the
Have you
canopy
heard?
of
So is that like what this is? Is something similar?
yeah, so the trees of the roots will twine together, especially if they're in a grove. So the root system of a tree naturally. So if you look at the canopy of the tree, all the leaves and stuff on the top, their root system is about 2 times bigger than that. So if it's in a
Wow.
grove of their root systems will grow together anyways, and then these mycorrhiza will then fill in the gaps in between them. So underneath the ground, it's like a solid, massive root system in there.
So that's super interesting that you talked about that the plants have like a kinship.
Mhm.
Um, because I came across a lady that was talking about how plants can talk. It sounds like it's very like it's on the same theory. And she was talking about that it's within a frequency that we could hear, but that it's so quiet and there's so much noise that it would be hard for us to hear it with our own ear. Um, and of course, we'd have to put our ear down because it's the roots that make the noise, and that each plant kind of has like so each species of plant kind of has its own like signature sound to it. And they were able to prove that they were using vegetables and growing them in a garden scenario, and the plants could tell if it was an aggressive plant that was next to it or a similar plant to them, and they like did a bunch of variations of the experiment. Um, but the plant acted different when it was an aggressive plant versus the similar plant. It grew different, and they did a bunch of stuff of sectioning the plant away from the other plant, putting boxes over it, and the only thing they didn't mess with was the root system. And then so that's when they started looking to see how does the plant know what's next door to it. And then that's how they found out that they make a noise, that they actually literally have a frequency that they put off.
That's really crazy. That's super interesting because I've always like heard about people planting like what they call ally plants in their garden and stuff next to each other,
Mhm.
and that they just seem to do better whenever you plant them within the same vicinity of each other. So that makes sense if they can recognize what's planted around them and like if they will be able to coexist together or not. That's really cool.
Yeah, and it was interesting because the lady that was talking about it, she was not a plant person, that she's an animal person. And but she was curious because she was seeing the animals that she was working with and plants like in their surrounding areas. So then her mind kind of started to wonder about, well, how are they different than animals? And started doing these different little experiments. And then this kind of took off on its own little thing.
That's
Yeah, it
super.
was super interesting.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and especially saying she wasn't a plant person to begin with, like, she wasn't walking into it with an idea already in her head. Hmm.
And then it kinda, um so then I wanted to know more about that. So I was looking into a few things and found this whole thing. There's like a whole network of researchers that are going off the idea of intelligence without a brain. And so that's what they kind of classify a lot of plants as because they don't technically have a brain, not like a brain like we us have brain. But they took this guy took a mimosa plant, which it's kind of like has like little fingers looking leaves on the branches.
Mhm.
Um, and they when if you touch the little leaves, they, like, close up like this, and then, they're on each side of the stem, and they close up together when you touch it.
Oh, okay.
And then if you touch the branch, so let's say my little finger leaves here. Okay. So, if you touch the leaf, they close up and they fold, and then if you touch the branch drops.
Hmm.
And so they were trying to figure out why it does it. And every plant of the so they were trying to figure out why it does it because every plant that is the mimosa plant does it. So it wasn't just like a it's like a safety mechanism within the plant. And they think that the reason why if the leaves get touched, the leaves react so quickly is to ward off any insects that might carry disease or try to eat them. And then if the branches get touched, the plant looks very droopy, like the leaves like really droop.
Hmm.
So they think that the reason why the plant does that is to look less appealing to herbivores so they don't get eaten.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So then the guy was talking about how it reminded him of Venus flytrap. So then he was starting to talk about the Venus flytrap knows how to count. So he took a Venus flytrap and he stimulated the little hairs inside the mouth, and nothing happens. It doesn't close. And then he goes off to talk about how they only have so many times that that bloom the, can close before it starts to like die off. And so the Venus flytrap to sustain itself is only going to close if there's a high chance of food is going to be inside. So it has to have so many triggers of those hairs within a certain amount of time. So
Hmm.
he like triggered it once, nothing happened. Waited 20 seconds, did a little talk about something else, and then hit it again. And then within like 3 to 5 seconds, hit it again and that thing snapped shut. So then they wired it with little electrodes to the mimosa plant and stimulated the Venus flytrap again to close. So when they first touched it and the Venus flytrap did not close, the mimosa did nothing. But then when they hit it within the 3 seconds and it stimulated the Venus flytrap to close, the mimosa plant dropped all its leaves, like drooped of them.
Hmm.
So whatever signal the Venus flytrap was telling itself to close, it was able to transmit through the electrodes and stimulate the mimosa plant.
That's so crazy. That's super
Yeah.
interesting because then, like, that shows directly that the signal that stimulated the Venus flytrap to close, also transmitted into the mimosa plant. Like, that's super, super cool.
Yeah, and then to think about it that the Venus flytrap knew not to respond to the first signal, so it did nothing and no signal went out. It was when it was signaled to close, then the mimosa responded.
Yeah, that's super
I
cool.
don't
And
know.
like
It's just
that's
super crazy.
yeah, and that's a super interesting, like, I guess, proof that the Venus flytrap has like advanced genetically to understand when is it actually food, when is it actually worth it to close, than to like be able to lose this bud, because after that bud loses, after so many times of opening and closing, that area is not going to be able to feed the plant. Thus has less likely to survive, least amount of buds that there is. That's really interesting.
Isn't that crazy? And I didn't know that about Venus flytraps before this. I didn't know that after so many times of closing, it like dies. But I guess it makes sense because it's very similar to um, like a bud on a regular flower. Like after so many times of it blooming, it starts to wilt and do all the things. I don't know if it's technically a flower, but
Well, like my pitcher
it makes
plants,
sense to me
yeah, so
to call
my
it a flower, a Venus flytrap.
right? Yeah, like my pitcher plant, they say the pitcher part of the plant, it's a morphed leaf is what they call it. But
A what?
even a morphed leaf.
Morphed. Okay.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So but even the pitchers on my pitcher plant, after a little while they turn brown and die off. Um but the same thing, if the plant doesn't have
Hmm.
those, the plant's not going to be able to survive because they're carnivorous plants also.
Yeah,
Um
I did. I always thought for a very long time that the Venus tripe was the only plant that was like that, but it's crazy to think that there's like a whole gaggle of them.
oh yeah. There's so many carnivorous plants, Mom, it will blow your mind.
Probably.
Yeah. Oh, okay, so one of the science experiments that I found for showing that the trees like push nutrients to each other through the mycorrhiza, they took
Mhm.
two trees, I believe they were both pine trees, um, and they put them inside of a planted pot together, and then put mycorrhiza inside of the dirt, and they covered one tree with radioactive carbon dioxide and like put a little case around it. And then the other tree, they did nothing to it. And so whenever the trees were photosynthesizing, it would absorb that radioactive carbon dioxide and it would create radioactive sugars within the tree. And then they took photographic paper or like film and wrapped it around the planted pot of the trees so that they could trace and figure out
Uh-huh.
exactly where that radioactive sugars went through the root systems.
Oh.
Yeah. So whenever they let the tree photosynthesize that and put the film on there, they were actually able to see the exact line in the photograph of where those sugars went. And sure enough, it went right down through the root system and then went through the mycorrhiza of the mushrooms and then pushed into the other tree. And then when they tested the other tree with DNA testing, they found those radioactive components inside of the other tree, proving that it absorbed it through the roots and into it.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that's how, like, I know that trees help with pollution, and I know the whole idea of trees and they take in carbon dioxide and make oxygen. Like, I know all that. Um, but I wonder if that's one of the ways that they fight against pollution because if they absorb that in and send it through the dirt and send it out, that also makes sense about how other plants can get sick too. Hmm, that's interesting.
Yeah. No, and that's a good point because I didn't think about it that way. But they also thought and realized like plants, whenever they're in distress, they'll push a signal of communication through their roots, kind of like what you were talking about. They can talk to each other and warn each other if they have like uh, pests or something. Also, they did a test in I don't remember where it was, but they tested and there was one tree that was like infested with beetles, and then
Mm,
everywhere around it they were watching, and all the trees around it then started producing a different enzyme inside of the trees, and they made them less like likable or like enticing, I guess, to the beetles maybe. Because the beetles didn't touch hardly any of the trees around it, but that first one was just covered. So they were able to,
crazy.
yeah, they were able to get the message across and kind of warn everybody else, and they were able to create this different enzyme.
Wow, that is nuts. And then to think about that they have to have enough intelligence and survival desire, I guess you could say, um, to know that that type of bug is gonna be less appetized by
Bless you.
so sorry. Bless me. That one stuck up. That they would be less appealing if they made this change in what they were producing and making to where this bug wouldn't attack them.
Yeah, no, I think it's super cool. Um, that they were able to realize that and change. Like it shows that yeah, they might not have a brain, but there's something stored somewhere, like some sort of knowledge.
Yeah, that's so crazy.
Yeah. So this okay, so my whole life, like I've always heard because I was in environmental science in high school and this kind of thing, and we always said like if the trees are too close together, they're gonna suffocate each other and kill each other, right? And that it was like a competitive area within these forests for the trees to survive and have territory. But after realizing like they push each other's nutrients, they help each other realize when a pest is they near, all of these different things. It's more like a community that they actually work together and help each other thrive versus trying to kill each other out like it was always thought, which I think is really interesting. And like after I did a little bit more research, figure out why the trees would want to work together and want to build these connections between each other. And one thing I found is that the canopy in the trees, like if an opening opens up in the canopy, it makes it more dangerous for the trees because then, like if you watch the trees flow, they always flow together, right? There's like in the wind, there's not one tree going this way and they're going like this, they all kind of flow the same direction. And doing that, the branches then knock into each other in the canopies and help hold each other up during windstorms. So without your buddy next to you, you have more area that you're going to have to sway to then be able to push off the other tree on the other side of it, which then you could tip over and uproot yourself. And then you'd break all those connections to everybody else also.
Well, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do know that to some point, like you have to have like a variety of aged of trees and stuff in like a healthy forest because eventually like the old ones die out if they're not producing new ones, that whole life cycle. But I do know if it's like a lot of the little trees don't do as well if it's super crowded because they're like blocked by the canopies and stuff of the taller trees. But I guess in a way you could even think about it, well, if there's not room for that tree to grow there, and it doesn't grow as well until some of the bigger trees fall off and die and that space opens, then it will get more sunlight and grow into that space.
Yeah, so if the trees are in a tight spot, when the other trees die off, they'll be able to take their spot and fill that gap in the canopy.
Yeah. I was watching Redwood Rising, and they were kind of talking about how a lot of the issues, so they're working on bringing back the redwoods and trying to make it a healthy old growth again. Um, and they were talking about how a lot of the area they would air seed, and I had never really heard of that. Like it makes sense that yeah, they would do that. Um, but they were talking about that that's why some of the trees are like literally on top of each other was because they would just fly over an area that they had just logged and just dump a bunch of seeds. And so they were going through trying to fix that so that each tree like had their own space and um, like restructure it. Like there was one area they were working on that had a creek that used to naturally run through it. And because they needed to get across to the other side to log, that the logging company literally just filled the creek to make a slash pile and used it as a road to go across the creek and then never undid it when they left, when they were done logging that area. So now they're going back and they're like cleaning areas up like that and like trying to restore the creek back and do some other stuff. So yeah, it's definitely interesting.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, that's there's so much I could talk about with the redwoods, but I think we will save that for another video.
Oh, good idea.
Yeah.
Good idea. Maybe we could road trip there. Do a field trip.
Oh, I would love that. The redwoods is like one of my favorite places on earth.
I know. And it's so funny because I know we said we weren't going to talk about it, but um, to live so close to it
Mm.
and like be raised half the time over there. And to us, I mean, it's still a special thing, and I still get excited when we go. And like every trip, we try to go check something out. Like the last trip, we drove the back way um, out from Papa's house.
Mhm.
And it was a road I had been on before because we had gone and done some of the trail hikes that come off that road. But it was drive into that trailhead, turn around, drive out. I had never driven all the way through it. And there was way more trails past the ones that we usually went to that I didn't know about. And the road is only passable certain times of the year.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So it was really cool to like go through there. And then now that I'm like Facebook stalk Redwood Rising, it's kind of cool because I know the areas they're talking about when they're talking about what they're doing in this area and that area. Um, so it's kind of cool. But then to think that there's other people that never will never see them, like they'll read about it in books and pictures and stuff like that, but they never get the opportunity to see them. I don't know. It's just crazy to think
Yeah,
that it's
no,
something that we have here and not everywhere.
yeah, well, just like the ocean. Like, um, my husband's family, like they had never seen the ocean before. And I'm like, what are they talking about?
Really?
They've never seen, yeah, they had never seen the ocean before. And they had like just went and seen the ocean like a couple years ago and posted on Facebook and stuff, was all excited that they finally were able to go see it. But that was something to me I had never I thought everybody went to see the ocean. But like when I went to the south, people asked me what a mountain looked like. Like that was
Yeah.
something that I never thought of before. I'm like, it's a mountain. It's got dirt. It's got trees. Like I don't know how to explain it to you. Yeah, but
Yeah, that was something that Boo Boo talked about when he went, um, on their little road trip
mhm,
to pick up Zachy. Um, or not Zach, they went with Zach to go pick up Ellie, that's what it was.
mhm,
Um, and he was talking about driving through the different places and the humidity and air quality difference from, like, one state to the next state. You know, for him, who has never really been out of Oregon, to travel on a road trip and I think they're only gone for, like, 24 hours, um, to go all the way to Texas and back in a car with a bunch of boys, like, it was
yeah,
it was pretty interesting.
yeah. But with like when because I flew instead of they drove. Like I remember I got on a plane here, in Oregon at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and they had to de-ice the plane before we could take off because it was frozen. Then to go all the way to Atlanta, Georgia, where when I got off the plane, it was 100% humidity at 12 o'clock at night, and it was 75 degrees in March.
Mm.
Yeah, it was definitely a shock to my poor little system. But anyways, we're getting way off tangent here. I want to know more about
I
what.
bet that's, when I went to North Carolina for the women's retreat that I was part of. So another, like, cool thing that I found out when, I was looking into the idea of intelligence without brain in plants, and I thought this would be, like, right up your alley because this one farmer who is on his homestead is called Deep South Homestead, and they were talking about tomato plants. Like, you could tell there was other crops there and he does other things, but what he was talking about at the time was tomatoes. And he was talking about how they use a like I'm going to say this word wrong. I know I'm going to. Electric culture.
Okay, yeah,
I think I said it right that
yeah.
time. And that he had found that the chirping of the birds and the frequency that the birds produce by their chirping, so kind of like you and your sound bowls, actually stimulate the plants to grow better. And so they had like when you like watch the video and stuff, um, they had tons of like plants and trees and stuff around like good bird habitat on like the edges of their fields and stuff. And you could just hear the birds going crazy. Um, and he didn't say what studies there was or what research had been to it, but he did state that he has found studies and research about the bird chirping in particular. So that was kind of cool. I didn't get to look into that too much, but um, he also talks about like I know you guys kind of started to do it with the copper and
Mhm,
making like antennas
yeah,
to put in your stuff. So he was talking about like he does that and he just tries to recycle stuff. So like they had a bunch of wire that came out of the old barn and so they stripped that and used it. And he literally just took um, a fiberglass rod that they had used in some of their pasture fencing for their electrical fence and just wrapped it around that and made an antenna. Um, and then, you know, the whole electric culture part of it brings frequency and stuff. I don't know a lot about it. I just found it super fascinating, so I definitely gonna look into it more. But anyways, it uses the copper as an antenna and takes all of that frequency and sends it to the roots. That helps the plants grow. And the bird chirping, he was talking about how, like, because since it's an antenna, it could pick that up more and sends it to the roots, which I thought was super crazy because I had just watched the video of the lady talking about how the roots can talk. So, like, that totally makes sense to me because if I would have read that first and then read it the other way, I probably would have thought, like, this old man's just crazy, you know? But to hear that the plants have their own frequency and talk to each other, and then now he's making an antenna that's bringing in the electrodes around and the frequency of the birds chirping, like, was super interesting.
Yeah, that is super interesting. And I think I heard somewhere that the birds chirping can impact plants' growth, but I don't remember who or where. Uh, it's probably on like one of the TikTok reels or whatever. But um,
Yeah.
so when we were looking up, okay, so if you're growing like hemp, there's different colored bulbs also for like different times of the plant. Like if it's growing, if it's in bloom, if it's, in what they call veg state, where it's kind of just like hibernating. You're supposed to use different colored lights. And I remember when we were looking up why they use different colored lights. So when it's in bloom, you want to use like a red LED light to grow them in. And it's because it imitates the color of autumn trees. So when the trees are, it's in fall when they're supposed to be done blooming and die off, um, the hemp plants notice that that's when they're supposed to die and realize that that's what color the trees around it is. And then it stimulates them to then die off.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's
So then,
super crazy.
yeah. So then, like, the plant can notice and kind of see the surroundings, I guess, in a way to be able to recognize that the trees around them are changing color.
Hmm. Well, I know when I was going through beauty school, they did like light therapy. And you can do it like in facials and stuff. And it was like kind of like you'd use if you're treating one type of thing or trying to stimulate growth or whatever it was, you would use different light bulb colors. Uh, but it wasn't a light bulb, it was um
The UV light.
like yeah, and then like they have ones that they're the little electrodes that are filled with different gases that are different colors. So there's like different things, different tools and stuff that you could use. But that's super interesting. So then that just goes to show again how similar plants are. And again, they are affected by different color light wavelengths, just how our skin cells are.
Yeah. Well, and I remember back in like sixth grade when we did like the cell biology and science class. Um,
Uh huh.
the only difference between our cells and the plant cells, from what I can remember, at least, um, is that plants are cells are rectangular and they have a solid wall around them, when ours are circular and they're soft around the outside.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So, like I've seen some research where people believe that like the cell wall that's around them can actually store memories and like more genetic coding inside of the cell of the plant.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So like our muscle,
Huh.
they believe like our muscles can store memories inside of themselves. So it's like they theorize that it's the same idea that that's how they can store memories the way that our muscles store memories.
That's interesting.
Mhm.
Hmm. That's super crazy. My mind's going like, spin it off like 10 different directions. That's really interesting. Hmm.
So you told me that you connected how to keep ghosts out of your house with all this stuff. I'm intrigued about that.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so it kinda goes back to the whole farmers thing, okay? So and they didn't necessarily make this statement or put it together. It was kind of my interpretation of, like, watching all this stuff and then how my mind goes from one thing to the next thing and then kinda spirals, into, like to come up with an idea or a theory. So, they were talking about the coils, making the copper coils, and using something that's non-iron because electricity and frequencies does not travel the same through iron as it does per se copper. And that when you wrap the copper around whatever you're using, so like a wood stake, the fiberglass bowl, that it has to be something that is non-conductive. So then that way the energy and stuff is focused on traveling through the copper wire. Okay, you follow me? Makes sense?
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay. So here's where it gets crazy. So the old man was talking about how the difference within the and how things have changed from when farming a couple generations ago versus farming now has changed. And then he was talking about how everything's plowed like all the time. Everybody's always plowing their fields, like they plow before they plant, they plow at the end of the crop to like rototill things back in and whatever. So then he had mentioned about what most of the metals that they use to make that stuff is high in iron. And that iron disrupts the magnetic fields in the dirt. And because of that, it changes like the makeup of the dirt. And that's why the whole theory of the copper rod around, to make the antenna into the dirt is what's making these plants grow better is because it's trying to change the dirt back and give it back its magnetic pull.
Mm.
So then my mind was like, well, no wonder you always hear in the movies and you see in the stuff, and that iron is used in a lot of protection stuff um, against unwanted energies or spirits. Because if iron disrupts the magnetic flow and the theory of ghosts and spirits that they're uh, energy, and that's how they like use all the different electrical um, monitors and sensors and stuff for them to like detect a ghost in the area, like on all the ghost shows and stuff. Um, so if you have iron there, that makes sense. Like in the hoodoo culture, that they can't cross an iron like barrier. So you would put like um, an iron stake above your door, or you would do a stakes in the ground around your property, and supposedly the bad energy couldn't cross it. But that's the same theory. Like they're working on the same idea. They're just using it in two different ways.
Huh.
Are you following what I'm saying?
Yeah, you're saying like because of the iron is disrupting the fields. Like, is that okay? Okay. Well,
Yeah, like it's literally the same theory or process. At least in my mind, it's the same. Um, but they're just looking at it 2 different ways. Like, the farmers are looking at it that the iron tools and plowing with iron blades is disrupting the magnetic field and demagnetizing the dirt, which changes the electric flow in the dirt and how the plant's roots are working. And that's why doing the electroculture is helping the plants grow because they're reversing that demagnification of the dirt.
Mhm.
But then my mind instantly was like, "Oh, well, if they are showing that iron tools are disrupting the environment around them and creating a block in the energy flow, then it makes sense why iron would do that across the board." So then, like, energies in people's houses and unwanted ghost visitors and, different stuff like that, like, my mind just spiraled from there. And then I was talking thinking about, like, the seeds and stuff. So then it kinda went down a whole 'nother thing, and I found a late so there's a French guy, that did he calls it fertilizing with magnets, and he creates these little, like, box things, and they have little sticks sticking out the top of them, and he uses those around his garden and in between his plants, and it's combination of magnets and copper wire and stuff, but he calls it that's what he uses as his fertilizer. And so he could actually get similar results of putting these little devices that he made around his garden to get his plants to grow similar to what people would use get the same results from using fertilizer.
That's really interesting.
Okay. So wait, it gets better. So there was a lady that saw that and then she went down the rabbit hole of everything. And she's in the southern hemisphere and all of the stuff that she was finding of people doing tests and experiments were all in the northern hemisphere. So she did her own experiment. So she took beans and magnets. Okay. So she tried them a couple different ways. So she had taken magnets and figured out which was the south side and the north side of the magnet, which to figure that out, you need the easiest way is the compass. And then the compass will point north to a south side of a magnet. So if you have a compass and let's say this side of my hand is the south side of the magnet, when you put it to the compass, the needle of the compass will point north. If you flip it around, it will point south. Like it will flip. Okay.
Okay.
So she took the south side of the magnet and put it face up in the bottom of like a paper Dixie cup. She took the same amount of beans and put them inside of a wet paper towel and put that paper towel of beans in the Dixie cup. So she exposed the beans overnight and then on all of them except for one, she removed the magnet after that. So she had one Dixie cup that was like a control that was not exposed to the magnet at all. Then she had one that was exposed to the south side of the magnet overnight. She had one that was exposed to the north side of the magnet overnight. And then she had one that was exposed to the south side facing up magnet for the whole experiment. Okay. So the experiment only went for 4 days because she said the results were so overwhelming after 4 days, she didn't need to continue it. Um, but the magnet that was exposed to the north side and the one that had the control that had nothing did about the same. The control one that wasn't exposed to the magnetic field at all actually did a little bit worse than the north side of the magnet. And then the other ones, the ones that were exposed to the south side of the magnet just overnight versus the one that was exposed the whole time did really, really well. Like, when she was showing the videos and the pictures of them, like, the sprouts off these beans were, like, this long, and the one that was exposed to the magnet the whole time did better than the one that was just exposed overnight, but they were pretty close. Like, it wasn't, like, I couldn't really tell, like, when she was just showing the pictures of them, but when she held them up and, like, measured them, a majority of the ones that were exposed the whole time definitely were bigger than the other ones.
That's really interesting. That's crazy.
Yeah, yeah. I thought it was super like, it's kinda like the same thing, like, they just exposed it to, uh, a magnetic field, which I guess that is called magnet culture, just like how the other one was electric culture,
Mhm.
um, and they exposed it. So then the whole theory of, like, they used to have, um, like, in a lot of cultures, they were very particular about what plants they planted where and when they started their seeds, and some of them even had, like, almost ceremonial stuff that they would do to the seeds before, and they would, like, take them to an area and place them on a rock overnight, and then they would gather them the next day before they planted them. So then that got me down a whole thing of, like, did people know this before? Like, did they realize if they did that, it worked better? So was the magnetic pole in that area different because they hadn't been plowing the ground there and working it? Or was the rock they set it on a conductor, so it had a different magnetic field around it that stimulated these seeds to grow?
Or it could have been on a ley line and they just didn't realize.
Right? I didn't think about that. Yeah, because like, ley lines have been proven to have different energy flows and stuff through them. But isn't that crazy? Like, how all of that like, I was just how it all, what am I trying to say here? Like, all swirled together. Like, they were all very different things, and they were all testing very different things, but it all kinda came back to the same conclusion, kinda like with you and the mushrooms. Like, it all has to do with the way they speak to each other and their roots and the electrical flow that goes between all of it, like, I don't know. I just thought it was super crazy. And now hearing, like, what you found out about the mushrooms, like, it's very, very similar.
Remember, we do not treat, cure, or diagnose any illness. So if you have any questions about anything we talked about today, please reach out to your provider.
So we are always so honored and blessed that you spent your time with us, and we can't wait to visit with you next time. So please come back and visit us, but until then, go forth with love and intention.